So I just want to welcome everybody. My name is Adam Oster, and I am the Community Engagement Librarian for the Library of Michigan. And I'll let my colleague Matt introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Matt Pacer. I am one of the reference librarians here. I focus on, I'm the coordinator for the Michigan collection and the rare book room, among other associated duties. So I welcome you tonight for our virtual program on land record resources at the Library of Michigan. I'm going to turn off my video feed in a little bit, but I just want to briefly mention the agenda for this evening's program. I'm going to talk just briefly a little bit about Library of Michigan, talk a little bit about our collections and what you can find here at the Library of Michigan, because we always encourage you, if you haven't been here, to come stop by and visit us, ask your questions, or to call us or email us, and then get into the program. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the different land record resources that you can access here at the Library of Michigan, things that will help you with your research, and then talk a little bit more about Sanborn Maps. And then, depending on time and how well the whole internet situation is working out for us, go and just do a little bit of demo, but then definitely open it up for questions at the end. So as Adam said, go ahead and type your questions in chat, or you can wait towards the end or for the end of the program, and we will do our best to answer them. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just stop my video, and we're going to proceed. So welcome, this is the Land Record Resources at the Library of Michigan. So first, let's go ahead, as I mentioned, and talk just a little bit about ourselves. As some of you may have heard from attending these different programs, we are, the Library of Michigan is that state institution created to collect and preserve and provide access to the story of us, the story of Michigan, and to help support the libraries and their role as community anchors throughout Michigan. We're one of the oldest departments in state government, been functioning since 1828 in territorial days. At that point, we served state government and the legislature. And our setup is what we think of is a lot like the Library of Congress, but we are like the Library for Michigan. So as a brief timeline that you can see on the page, the slide in front of you, 1828, Michigan Territorial Library. Then we move into statehood and became the Michigan State Library. Then we packed up all of our bags, headed from Detroit over here with no 94, no 96. So long adventure to here in Lansing. And then in 1983, with Public Act 540, we become the Library of Michigan. And then finally, in 1988, the Michigan Library and Historical Center opens up. And for those of you who have not visited our building, if you look on that picture on the right-hand side bottom of your screen, that's the building we are currently in. The library is on the left-hand side with all the windows. And on the right-hand side is the State Museum and the State Archives. So definitely a good one-stop shop to do a lot of Michigan researching. So definitely, if you haven't been visited us, stop by. We're open Monday through Fridays, 10 until 5, and Saturdays, 10 until 4. Going to move to the next slide. This is just a nice image of the atrium on the library side. The images from 2019 from the Fall Family History event sponsored by MGC. And I really like this image because it's a really good image to show the library in its grandeur, and that it really is a good place to do your Michigan history research. That level with the tables, that's the second floor. Then the floor right above it is the third floor that houses the State Law Library and the main collection or general collection. And then that upper floor, the fourth floor, has the rare book room and the beginning of the main collection and the federal documents collection and the general periodical collection. But that second floor is where most of the Michigan history materials are located at. But on the next slide, little bit of information about those different collections. So Michigan documents, they can be annual reports, Railroad Commission, compiled laws, joint documents, the Michigan History Magazine prior to 2009, the Pioneer and Historical Collections, and numerous other reports and maybe pamphlets, books published by different state agencies, departments, and commissions. Michigan collection, we have got your newspapers, gazetteers, plats, atlases, county and place histories, transcriptions. It's that either commercially or privately published, kind of that unpublished material about Michigan, its people, its places, its things, lions, tigers, Red Wings. Then on the third floor, as I mentioned, we got the State Law Library, again, focusing mostly on Michigan and that Great Lakes Basin area. And then the fourth floor, the Rare Book Room, the Martha W. Griffiths Michigan Rare Book Room. And that's kind of a good amalgamation of law, Michigan, and general Americana materials. Could be books, pamphlets, maps, periodicals, and so forth, like the View Master slides that kids use. There's a couple have been published just on Michigan topics, like the Tulip Festival. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide because we're going to go.
Matt, I have to correct you. It's not the Tulip Festival.
What
Somebody from Holland will hit us really hard with this. It's
what?
Tulip time.
Tulip time. I apologize.
Tulip
okay. Time. Okay.
Carry on.
Thank you for that correction.
Yes.
That's great. I'll have to remember that, but I probably will say that all the time.
That's okay.
So back to land record resources. Why we're here. So, what are they? So I think a lot of people, most people think about patents and deeds, but there are other sources, definitely here at the Library of Michigan, that are related sources that contain information about land records, about land. And they can be extremely useful in helping to build context for that family history story that you are building. So where can we start with some of those other related resources that have this kind of land information? But before I talk about that, just some brief information about land patents for those who are unfamiliar. First, the availability of land helped encourage migration to get people here to Michigan. And it's important to note that the first sale of a piece of land is called the patent, and then the person purchasing that land is the patentee, and then subsequently they're the deeds. So just kind of keep that in mind. Also important to keep in mind when doing land research is that there is a very low, or has been, I should say, so far, knock on wood, a low loss ratio of these records. As we think about loss like 1890 and fires for the census, and things like that. So there's a very low loss on these records. So the book on the left, it's Land Property Research. It's by E. Wade Hone. And this is a really good reference resource. It talks a lot about the pre-US possession. So it's going to talk about land resource records and information about French, Spanish, British, and Mexico ownership of different sections of the United States. It also includes a section on the federal and state lands. Within that section, it'll speak about the location of repositories, and it will give further reading selections. To continue, Michigan is mentioned in the federal land section in this book. So just to make a note of that. It will also list the list of which offices have deeds in which counties in the United States. So you know where you need to go to contact for information. And also very useful, it provides some decent instructions on how to request land records. Some good hints and ideas, very good. The item on the right is the Michigan Atlas of Historical County Boundaries. So it lists when the counties were created, so when they're authorized, the source of the authorization, when it was effective, when it took place, and then, very important, the chronology of the county development. And this is extremely important, particularly in the 1800s, prior to 1890, prior to 1880 or so, because the county boundaries, particularly say in Michigan, they changed. The counties were fewer in the early 1800s and they had more land. So depending on the time in which you're researching, you may need to look at a different county from the current county setup. You might think it is Oakland County, but maybe it's back in the 1840s or early 1850s, and maybe you need to look at Wayne County instead. So that's a really good resource. And also it will include information on who controls the county judicially. And that might point you to different counties in terms of which courts, which probate court, and so forth that you need to go to look for other records. Below each book has the call number that they're located at in the Library of Michigan. So in case you want to come and visit and look at these items, they're there. But with that, I'm going to move to the next slide. Because here's another good example of an item called Landsman of Wayne County by Paul Beck. This resource focuses on the first landowners in Wayne County. So it really is using those patent records from the federal government. But also important on this, or in this book, is there's a great section on the political development of townships. They also speak about the public acts that made any changes to the township and or county. There's a section on private lands within like what we know as Michigan, and mostly these are French lands. There's also a section specifically on Detroit. And then also there is a section covering what are called reserved lands. These are lands set aside for universities, military bases or establishments, indigenous peoples, and things like salt springs. Lastly, what's very beneficial in this book is there's an index of names in alphabetical order, and you may be able to find a description of the land, its acreage perhaps, and maybe even a patent date for that piece of land. What I always encourage researchers to do is when you are looking at, say, our library catalog, answercat.org, or even if you're looking in a different state catalog, look for county books in a similar title format, Landsmen or Early Landowners of Oakland County, or something along those lines. Fill in the blank for the county for either Michigan in the catalog or in a different catalog for a different state, because these types of works can be very beneficial for research. I'm going to move on, next slide. There's a handful more of good related resources that can be beneficial for your research. Again, that federal land sales in Michigan by Lucas. As it says here, it's a good index by county and township to the microfilm rolls of the federal land patents housed in the Bureau of Land Management. So at the reference desk, it's under that call number HD 243. So you can ask us if you stop in to look at that item. There's the Department of Treasury Local Property Services. It's those track books from 1818 to 1962. Unfortunately, they're on microfilm, but they are here, and we can point those out to you. And then another example of that Landsman Book of Wayne County is this Original Land Records, Genesee County, compiled by Seltzer. So, which is why I suggested kind of think of those other terms, original land records, landsmen, early landowners of a county, to see what has been published before. And then the last point on here that I want to definitely highlight is answercat.org. That is our library catalog. So make it your friend. Perform those different searches, different terms to see what we do have either in print, fiche, or microfilm. But besides those handful of items that are on the screen in front of you, start thinking about what other resources that you may have used before that could have some pieces of information on land. What about county histories? What about directories that we have? What about those pioneer and historical collection items that we have? So kind of start thinking of what other types of resources, Michigan State Gazetteers. So if we want to think about directories, and I would throw State Gazetteers in here as a directory, what could we find? What types of good information could be in here? Maybe list of resident names, businesses there. What types of maps are in the front of that city directory that would provide at least tidbits or bits of information to help round out the context of that story you're creating. So one good example that I use that perhaps you've already stumbled upon, if I were to look at the Toledo, Ohio, it's where I grew up, city directory for the street I grew up on, I'm going to find another Pacer on the block. It's my last name, one house where I grew up, and then about a block and a half down, same street, there's another Pacer. And yes, they are a relative of my dad. It was a cousin. They never really talked to each other. They just had nothing to say, but there was a relative just down the street. So other bits of information that may help in your research.
Hey, Matt,
Yes.
we have a question in the
Yeah.
chat asking
Yeah.
if you could talk a little bit more about the Treasury track books. Is there other information that you can kind of expand upon, or of what experience that you've had with them, anything like that?
I have not actually had a question asking about those track books. What I do know about them is that they're supposed to be captured images of the track books from the different counties about property. I don't know what they contain because I've never used them for research. So that would be something I should prepare myself for the next time we offer this
Well,
this
I think
presentation.
I can
Maybe
offer
you
just
can.
a little bit, because
Okay.
I've used them before,
Mhm.
if they're what I think they are,
Mhm.
for where they will list the owner
Mhm.
of a piece of property, but then they will have the I think it's just the not the legal description, but something where it indicates within what
Section, township, and
yeah,
range.
section, township,
Okay.
that sort of thing, because
Okay.
I was using that before when trying to track down where poor farm properties were,
Mhm.
and that was one of the ways in which that I was able to expand, use them
Yeah.
a little bit, and then you could see when the sale took place and then the
Mhm.
next owner took over of owning that particular portion of a section of a
Mhm.
township or stuff, something like that.
Yeah. I think they might also be useful if you're trying to locate, or actually not locate, if you're trying to determine what has been on that piece of land, so that if there is some type of cultural resource staff person looking at a piece of property, um, and it's a parking lot, they can use city directories to see what was there, but they can probably go to those tracks and then maybe get a more fuller description, or a little bit more description of what that thing was on that piece of property. I'm just kind of speculating there based on what Adam just said, but I can see how using it for some type of like brownfield credit research, or some type of like National Register nomination, if they're trying to do some some regional or area research of what was surrounding a particular building if something is vacant, like a vacant property and so forth. So that's I can see how that could be used.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see there's somebody. Are there
Mm.
county directories pertaining to mineral rights?
I have never heard or seen anything like that. I don't know, because first I would have to see or investigate if mineral rights are, because I think mineral rights are treated differently here than, say, out west. I think they reside with the state of Michigan, but I don't know. That's something I would have to look with the DNR.
Actually, it looks like that falls under Eagle.
Or, okay, Eagle.
Yeah, so I think if anybody was producing, well, let's say
Mm,
currently, I mean,
yeah,
historically, it might have been something under, a
mm,
different,
conservation maybe.
yeah, conservation or something like that. But it looks like some of the more
Mm,
recent publications that have been put out by the Environment
I know.
Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and that if they had any sort of directories,
Mhm.
that's where that
They would
would. Yep,
be, yeah.
yep,
Okay, good, good questions. So I'm going to
yep.
go ahead. I'm going to go to the next slide.
Well, one last one related
Go ahead.
to city
Sure.
directories.
Yeah, go
Are
ahead.
they on? There's one that's asking, are they online?
Yes and no. If you come to the library building, you can use our ancestry.com subscription, and there are some city directories there. If you use the MyHeritage Library Edition through mel.org, I know there are some city directories there. And if your local library, your local public library has access to Heritage Quest, there are city directories on that database. I just can't tell you which cities are where. They're not. No one digital source has all the city directories. You really have to hit a bunch of different sources, and even then, not everything has been digitized. So there are still, you'd have to kind of visit us to see a fair amount of them as well. It's not quite the perfect answer, but that is what is currently out there.
And Catherine's also pointed out that there's a few that are on the Internet Archive, Google
So
Books, and Family Search digitized books.
there you go. So even more places. So you got to be spending some good quality time on the internet, kind of tracking down city directories, which is always fun. Well, it can be that, depending, it can be.
Okay, well, yeah. Well, we are librarians. We are
I
sort of that kind of crowd.
yes, that is true.
Yes.
So circling back to these general related resources, we're going to move on to the plats and atlases. And just to reiterate, we have them oversized in print, on fiche, and film. So definitely got to search that catalog, the catalog. This one is just a random example, Plat Book, Oakland County, Michigan. And just like city directories, Plat books can be very helpful for those kind of aha moment discoveries. A patron came in looking through different Plat books for a piece of property their relatives, grandparents owned many, many, many years ago. And then when they found that particular property, they were surprised at not just other family names in that township area, but they were also surprised at other friends of the family names that they knew that married into their family. So again, it's that serendipity. That's a good reason to use Plat books to find some other land information. But next, I want to go ahead and talk a little bit more, not a little bit more, talk more about the Sanborn maps that we have and that you can find elsewhere. So what are the Sanborn maps? And these are detailed maps of US cities and towns in 19th and 20th centuries. They're published by that Sanborn Map company. Most people just call them Sanborns. And the primary purpose was to allow, fire insurance companies to basically assess liability in urbanized areas in the United States. And depending on the city size and so forth, they can contain a lot of detailed information about properties and individual buildings. I put 12,000 up there. That's a good estimate of how many cities and towns are in the Sanborn maps. So who are going to use these Sanborn maps? Well, you may have already used them before in your family history research, but city planners might use them, historic preservationists, again, because they want to see the built environment, what was around maybe a piece of property, maybe what the property looked, well, I shouldn't say looked like, what if there's something new there, what was the property before? They might have some good historical information. Industrial archaeologists, again, that built environment, and then geographers and demographers may need to look at these Sanborn maps. So one of the fun parts about Sanborn maps is interpreting the map information. And most of the maps, at least all the ones that I have used through our digital subscription, are black and white. So I'll just kind of put that caveat out there. There are varying colors that are used to convey information that's going to identify the construction of materials used in a building. So as I say, brick and tile are represented by kind of a reddish pink color. You might get additional details in the key, identifying different characteristics. You might get maybe number of stories, if there's skylights, elevators, maybe building height. And then the scale is 50 feet to an inch. And just for a reference, that's why we put that image there on the left of the screen, just so you can kind of gauge and see what you may find on the map. So if I move to the next slide, there's a lot of other details that you may or may not see, again, depending on the size of the city and what was put into it. You might see firewalls, street and sidewalk widths, street names. That can be very beneficial, particularly if, like, I know there was a street here. The street was called such and such. Maybe going to Sanborn Maps might give you a clue of, oh, this is the street name, this is where the street was. Maybe there's been a lot of construction and work over the decades that the street no longer exists. And this is what I can see what was there. Water and gas mains, fire hydrants, block numbers. So as you can see, a lot of information potential here on Sanborn Maps. When you're using the Sanborn Maps, you usually will have one page versus multiple sheets. Again, depending on the size of the city, you may have multiple sheets, or you may just have one sheet. And depending on the size, the typical map is going to have three components. It's going to have a title page, an index, and then the different sheet numbers that are on the title page. So this is just kind of a screen cap of Lansing itself, where what we can see on the left is the title page. But for Lansing, on the right-hand side that was blown up, which is that middle picture, the index, there's the index component. And then within the index component, you're going to have, say the name of a street and then a sheet number to go to, because there might be more than one sheet. Some larger cities, you might have a title page and then the index might be on the second page or even the third page. So it's kind of a rough layout of what you're going to find. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. So if we're trying to find a location in a Sanborn map, so we're going to go to that index, because the streets are going to identify specific sheets, or specials are going to identify a specific sheet that a building is on. And then you're going to go find the sheet and the number. And this is going to make a little more sense once we get to the demonstration. And I can show you, the index and the sheets, and this is how we're going to navigate the Sanborn maps. So here's just a sample here that we created. State office block was the home of the state library, 1871 to 79. So it's located at what is now Allegan Street, the corner of Allegan Street and Washington Square downtown. And on the left-hand side, we have, the big page with the arrow pointing to what would be a blown up location, which is going to be on sheet 2 of where this office building image that we found, I believe Adam found this image of Old State Block, third home of the state library. So what we want to think about in this particular example is what other material or resources should you use in conjunction with Sanborn Maps, like maybe pictures, postcards, and so forth. So if we continue on, just to kind of blow into what I was just talking about, there's the blown up image on the left hand side, and then even zoomed in a little bit more to that little office block of that image. So that picture of the state office block building was on that image above. And it's kind of difficult to see because I can't really blow into it, but there's a little more information about what was in that building written on the building itself. So those are different types of pieces of information that you may or may not see. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. So we're going to find and using Sanborn Maps. So where can we find Sanborn Maps? Well, yes, you can find them here at the Library of Michigan because we have a subscription, but other places, typically municipal offices, will have some kind of Sanborn Map access, maybe their own copy, maybe they have a digital subscription, but definitely some public libraries, academic libraries, and state library collections like us. There are some digital collections like the Library of Congress, and that's the website, and we're going to go there for a little bit so I can just show you how to get there. And then our Sanborn Map digital collection by ProQuest covers 1867 to 1970. And if you have a library card with us, you can get access to this remotely at your home. So I'll show you where to get a digital library card if you do not already have one. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Because sometimes Sanborn Maps may just pop up in odd places. And I want to thank Adam for this this piece of information here when, the Sanborn Maps were, I think, found in someone's house and then were then donated to the Grand Rapids Public Library. So these maps can just be stumbled upon. So as a donation coordinator for the Library of Michigan, if you're perusing items in your house or a relative house, or maybe you're out at the Allegan Antique Market or another place and you find some good Michigan resources, contact us, let us know. It might be something that we may want to try to add to our collection, because we're always wanting to add materials to the Michigan collection and our state documents and our rare room. Just something interesting. Adam, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just something to kind of mention about this is that it was a house if anybody's familiar with Grand Rapids, it was in the Heritage Hill district. And Heritage Hill is full of homes that are quite historical. They go back to the turn of the century and much older. So it was just interesting finding, and I think if you go to the next page, Matt, you might have you didn't put it on here, but
okay.
In my version of this presentation, I've got pictures of what they look like, and they're large. They're like,
okay,
when they're not opened up, they're roughly about 2.5 feet by 4 feet before they're opened. So they are significantly large
huge
books. Yes.
Which is why if you use them on microfilm, because we do have copies on microfilm, it's many microfilm reels, and you're scrolling through a lot of slides back and forth. So digital access is very beneficial because you can use our view scan microfilm viewer, I would say that the digital access, so you can navigate to different sheets quickly. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. But if you want to come here and use the reels, that's perfectly fine too. We'll help get you set up. But circling back to, what other records do you want to maybe use with Sanborn Maps? I mentioned photos or postcards. So you can see kind of like, oh, this is what the building is, and I happen to find a postcard or an image, or taking it the other way. I've got this image and I've got an address. Well, let me go to a Sanborn map. What else was around it or there? But, thinking about newspaper articles and death records and directories, aerial images, parcel cards. So there's a lot of things that you can use in conjunction that might help with your family history story that you're constructing. So here's a really good example that Adam put together about using Mary Spencer, a state librarian, 1842 to 1923. We have the death certificate on the left. And if we zoom in, the image right below her photo there, we have the address, 326, I think that says Seymour. So if we
Sycamore.
Thank you, Sycamore.
Yeah.
So we can take that address.
No, I take it back. Matt, you were right. It was Seymour. Sorry.
Seymour?
Yeah,
no,
it's Seymour.
So Seymour, so you can take that address, whatever address it is, and then move it over to the Sanborn Maps. So you can begin to build and try to envision, well, what kind of was there and what is there? So, okay, what else can we find in a census document? So who else was living in that household? Just as an aside, I was helping a patron numerous weeks ago. They were using census records for one of their ancestors, and they kept finding them, decade after decade. And then a kid randomly appeared on the census rolls. And a couple census years later, the kid disappeared. But then by using other Plat maps and knowledge that they kind of folklore knowledge of the family, it was a family unit of some sort that was living with a neighbor near the plot, and then they moved in, or this particular person in the family moved in with them, something that they never knew. So you want to kind of use these multiple resources to build that large story. And they found it fascinating that this family moved in for a couple of decades and then moved out, and there's no information that they've been able to glean from other resources or folklore of who they were and why. But if we take Mary Spencer and then move forward, we have that address of Seymour. So we want to go to, Ingham County. And here we've picked, according to the information below, Sanborn Map, Ingham County, 1913. And we're going to go to a sheet. There's that little blue arrow. That's kind of what we're going to be focusing on for Mary Spencer. So as we move on and start blowing up, going to the corresponding sheet for Seymour, and then blowing up on the left-hand side, we have the block, and the arrow is pointing to this yellow building. The image on the right is now a zoomed in version, a little bit more, pointing to this yellow building structure itself. And if we go even further, that we know the block, we can see what was here. I think the letter D stands for dwelling. Usually in the index page, it'll have little notations, what different abbreviations mean. D is for dwelling, so on and so forth. So then we look at the block, and then if we do a Google map, which is what the image is on the left, we can see it's parking lot now. But through the Sanborn map, we can get at least a historical mental image that we can construct of, okay, this person lived or worked in this building, and the surrounding buildings on the block were roughly shaped like this and maybe housed this type of information. Maybe there was a cobbler, or a grocer, so on and so forth. And then whatever else has been labeled or put on the building in question. For us, what we see here in this example, just D for dwelling, I can't see anything else because it's not really zoomed in too much. So this gives you kind of a then and now picture of what we've lost and what we have now.
Just to build on
Yep.
that, Matt, it
Yep.
definitely shows, you say what we've lost, that like
Yes.
I know Lansing at one point had several of these
Mm.
sort of brownstone row
Zones.
houses.
Mm-hmm.
And this really illustrates that you could see along the top, along
Mm.
the right, and even down a little bit on the lower portion, that these would have been
Mm.
places that, whether it was state employees or other
These.
people within Lansing, because
Mm-hmm.
this is within what, 2 blocks, I think, of the Capitol. Um,
Probably
yeah,
because
and
we
that
got Ionian. Yeah.
you can even glean kind of the walking route
Mm-hmm.
that Mary would have taken to go to work, because where the blue arrow is, you would just start walking south, and
Mm.
then you're right to the Capitol where the library was at.
Yes.
So just a few other kind of thoughts on it, because
Yeah.
it's
Mm-hmm.
just sad that all this is
Mm.
gone.
Yes. Yes. Very true. So I'm going to move on to the next screen because now I'm going to do a new share and go to the internet so I can at least get you, since we're at 7:15, I want to at least have some good time for questions. So I want to at least quickly show you how to get to the Library of Congress, Sanborn Maps, and then our Sanborn Maps if you have a library card. So I'm going to do a new share and find that correct. So the page should be our website, Library Michigan. Is that what you see, Adam?
Yep, it is.
All right, excellent. So once you're at the Library of Michigan, to get to our Sanborn map, first you need a library card. So once you're here at our website, if we go to For the Public, click on that. Left-hand side menu, just point out, get a library card. If you click on this link, as long as you're a Michigan resident, there is a form at the bottom of the page on this link. And you can fill out the information, you can hit submit, and about 3, 4, 5 business days, we'll send you a digital library card that you can use to access the Sanborn maps. So if I scroll down a little bit more to online resources for library card holders, I click on that. It's going to give a big list of different resources that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just keep scrolling down because it's an alphabetical list, because our newspapers are here: Detroit Free Press, Fold 3, Heritage Hub, keep going, Sanborn Maps. And click on that, because this is the interface you're going to see, because you have to tell it to browse and explore. So then you got to tell it, and we only have Michigan, so you only get one choice. But then you have to build upon it. What city are you looking for? So I'm going to pick Lansing. As you can see, there's a lot: Holly, Homer, Jackson, so on and so forth, Lansing, and then select a date for which ones that they have. I'm just going to pick 13 to 26. And then it's going to open up. And this is what I want to show you is, from here, you're going to have to do a little bit of manipulating the image by zooming in with the plus and minus buttons. I tend to like to use the thumbnail grid up here on the upper right, because for Lansing, it's a bigger city, so we can see multiple sheets. We've got 105 sheets. So I'm just going to scroll up real quick. And it says sheet 0, cover sheet, and then the index sheet, and then the key. So they have a separate key sheet for maybe those abbreviations and whatnot. If I'm just going to click on the index sheet just so you can see. I'm going to zoom in far, so that once you find an item, well, Cedar Street School or Central Methodist Episcopal Church, Cherry Street School, it's going to give you a sheet number. So I'm just going to Cherry Street School 43. I'm going to go back to the thumbnail grid to go to 43. So I can zoom in. Oops. So some of the buildings, as you can see, it will list machine shop first, second, storage, second. So second floor, there's a second floor, it's used for storage. Machine shop cement floor, moving appliances, building here. And if I just scroll here, if I just move, we've got our Ds for dwelling, 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 dwelling. And these are different rooms, for lack of a better word. As you can see, some have more notations on them and whatnot, but that, whatever that sheet was called for this particular city, for Lansing, the key sheet might have more information about what is on there and hopefully providing an actual key. I gotta bear with me as I slide this. Yeah, there it is, the key of what those little numbers or symbols are going to tell you of what's there. As you can see, fire escapes, stone building, veneer, so on and so forth. So it's good to try to find that key sheet or that key on that title page, or maybe the key is on the index page. Again, depending on that size of the city. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly bounce over to the Library of Congress. So you can see the navigation there. I'm just going to switch to a different tab. Because when we're at the Library of Congress, I find it useful to go to the digital collections page here. And then within this digital collections page, to use the search box up here. And I just like to type maps because I just want to see what else is here. So Sanborn Maps comes up first, but there are other collections that they have digitized. So there's something maybe to spend some quality time with and see what's there. But if I click on Sanborn Maps, see, there's our in color. And collection items. I'm going to go towards the top menu bar. There's collection items. There we go. If we scroll. Oh, I just lost it. It won't let me scroll. Oh, there we go. Scroll down, because on the left side menu here, we can then really filter down to different states. Okay, we want Michigan. And then location, Kent County, so on and so forth. I'm just going to pick Lenawee County. And then you can drill down based on whatever city, I don't know, Adrian. And then we have a results list that we filter down to for the different Sanborn maps that are there. And if I remember correctly, when you're looking at a results list, we've got the year. So I'm using this Sanborn fire insurance map, Adrian, Lenawee, October 1888. That number 10, I believe, should be the number of sheets. Let me see if I'm correct. Well, it's not telling me. Oh, yeah, view 10 images in sequence. So then you can go in sequence and then you can click on, there's a lot of clicking to get to the actual viewer, but the viewer behaves a lot like our viewer, and it's not loading up. I don't know what they're doing. Well,
it can sometimes take a minute.
a while.
Yeah, some of these files are
There we
pretty
go.
large, so it can
Intensive.
take a second. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to leave that here because it is 7:23, and I want to make sure that we get to everyone's questions. So if you got questions, go ahead and either unmute yourself and ask some questions, or you can go ahead and type them in the chat. And I see that we've got quite a few email addresses here. I don't know, Adam, have you copied down any of these email addresses? Or
Well, as the the chat will get saved, and so we'll be
Good.
able to reference that
Good. That's what I
to
want to
get
make
that.
sure.
So all those will be in there.
Good. I'm just scrolling back up to see if there's any questions.
Yep, I think we got most of everything.
Hmm.
One thing I did want to grab, I found a really nice family search wiki entry on track books.
Oh,
Just to go
good.
back to that question,
Hmm.
and I'm going to put that in the link, or the link to it in the chat here. And I think kind of a good summary of it is that um, it's parcel land transferred from the government, originally maintained by the federal government for each parcel of land transferred from the federal government to private citizens, and they're used to identify property of ancestors, neighbors, and for clues for find associated land records. Um, but what they typically contain is the name of the purchaser, the description of the land, including the section, township, and range,
Hmm.
the date of the transaction, the type of transaction, and the final disposition of transaction, whether it was canceled, relinquished, or completed. And there's a sample image. If you scroll just a little bit further down, yeah, right there.
Hmm.
That's what I'm most familiar with
Okay.
of when
Yeah.
I've seen them. That
Hmm.
so like when I was looking for if when the county bought property for use for poor farm, you would see the name of the person who they purchased it from, and
Hmm.
then a bit more info about who what specific location that it was at, and a few stuff like that. But definitely better get used to knowing parts of how to identify parts of section, and
Hmm.
then that section, township, and range area of property.
Yeah. I'll leave this page up because it should be showing on the screen still. So
Yes, yep, it
good.
is. And then I
Is there
see
another?
there's a question. Isn't the mother lode of property records research the county register of deeds track index is showing all activity with regard to a piece of property over the years? I mean,
Oh,
I would agree with that. I would say that anybody who's doing land research, you're
yes.
always going to want to check with the register of deeds,
Yes.
um, because that's in Michigan is
Mm.
one of the primary, if not the primary, collector of property information within a county.
Mhm.
Um, and
You might,
uh,
depending on the setup, the where the planning office is located within the county government structure.
yeah,
They may also have these types of materials, maybe Sanborn maps, deeds, and so forth. But they might be housed in, within the same department, just a worker or two in the planning department. Using the maps along with the city directory would clarify. Yeah.
yep.
Those refer to federal records from Bureau of Land Management with your book from. I don't know, Catherine. I'd have to actually look at both side by side because her question is those refer to federal records from BLM, Bureau of Land Management. Maybe some of you have heard them as the GLOW records. So if you go online to a search and say GLOW records, you're going to get to the Bureau of Land Management site. Would your book from the state treasury be the same? I don't know how to answer that because I'd have to see them side by side. Do you have any ideas about that, Adam? Since you've used the track books, what?
Yeah, but see, when I used them, I was using them at the Grand Rapids Public Library, and
Okay.
I'm just going to assume
Mm,
that those were a
mm,
state
yeah.
record because or from the state, because
Yeah.
they were only going as far back to when Kent County was organized,
Mm,
and not before that in any sense. And
mm,
maybe that's just because they, once the county was organized was when they started creating them. But
mm.
I mean, Catherine, if you have any other experiences that
Yeah.
you've had, feel free to unmute yourself and kind of
And talk about them.
explain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I use the BLM track books all the time. I had just never knew that the state treasury had a book. So I'm super interested in coming
Yeah.
to see that and see how it's different.
Mhm.
Well, make
Yeah.
sure you let us know when you're coming in, because we can be looking at them with you.
Yeah, we can learn. I mean, there's just
Yeah. I mean, if there's
All
one
right.
thing that land records show, and
Yeah.
plus a lot of the other things that we have in our collections,
Mhm.
we are still discovering things
Mhm.
about them that, I mean, I've been with the state library now 4 years. Matt, you've been there what?
10 years and
10 years.
in a couple weeks. And
We even combined between the two of us,
there's way too much on the shelves out there for us
yeah.
to really get a excellent handle on
Hmm.
for researchers.
Yep. And somebody says here, Shelley, since last year when I learned from you about Sanborn Maps, I've been able to cross-reference and research 1861 to 1874 city directories, Sanborn Maps, census, and draft records. Some great information about my family. It was the Sanborn Maps that put it together. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, see, a great unifier right there. It's it's using all these pieces of information together instead of just separately when building your family story as you did. So that's a great success story. Woohoo!
All right. Any other questions,
Comments?
concerns?
Yeah.
Not that
This
like we
was
can really.
fabulous. Thanks so much, you guys. You did a great job.
Well, thank you.
Yes, this was really good.
All right. Well, I'll just double check one last time.
Yeah, I didn't see any.
Yeah, I don't think we've just hit 7:30. So just a
Perfect.
reminder to everyone that we'll have the recording of this. It should be up on Facebook pretty quickly. If you need to go back to it fairly soon, we'll have the recording of it on YouTube sometime in the next week or two once all the captioning has been done. And I should be getting from the chat everybody's email.
That's
and
good.
then
I'll PDFify it tomorrow.
Yep.
Then I'll get the email lists and I'll just start hitting send, send, send.
Yep. So with that, thank you everybody for joining us. And we hope to see you next month for our Michigan newspapers. That's on September 7, 6:30. And if we don't see you then, we hope to see you at sometime at the Library of Michigan at some point.
That's right.
So contact us at 517-335-1477,
Yep.
librarian@michigan.gov. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And always go to michigan.gov/library of Michigan.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you in the future.
Yep. Have a good evening.